Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Well, as you all know, NATO is holding a big meeting in Madrid today at the NATO summit. The focus is overwhelmingly on Russia in the wake of Putin's invasion of Ukraine last February, what NATO can do to help President Zelensky and his forces who are bravely resisting. Zelensky is going to be addressing the summit today, and what NATO needs to do to beef up its own defenses on its eastern flank to be able to deter any Russian attack against the alliance. And you may have seen yesterday headlines pointing to Sweden and Finland now joining NATO soon, or NATO going to raise 300,000 soldiers at higher levels of alert in order to be able to go east if ever they were needed. So NATO seems to have its sort of strategy for the eastern flank well resourced and well organized. But of course, there is not only Putin in the world. There are many other issues, and NATO, usefully in Madrid, is paying some heed to this by inviting, for example, the leaders of Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and Korea to discuss Indo-Pacific security with their European and North American counterparts. NATO also, in its new strategic concept, makes a mention too of China, which is not described in quite the same dark and threatening ways as Russia, but is still seen as a systemic competitor, which is not being helpful to Western goals at the present time. But if there's one direction that still seems to be missing in all of this, it's direction south. It's over the Mediterranean and towards Africa. Spain is hosting the NATO summit, and Jose Alvarez, the Spanish foreign minister, has been pointing out in recent days that if European security is going to be complete, we need a southern strategy, which is just as well resourced and just as robust as the one that NATO is developing for the East. Now, why is this? Well, there are clearly lots of threats now bubbling up in Africa. The Wagner mercenary group, which is funded by Russia, has spread its tentacles into Mali, into Chad, into the Central African Republic, into Burkina Faso, having previously been in Libya and in Syria. And this is not just a spearhead of Russian influence. The Wagner Group is also now increasingly running gold mines and diamond mines and precious metals extraction and all of these things, adding to local corruption. And the EU has already imposed sanctions against the Wagner Group. China also wants to have a greater military footprint in Africa. It's opened a base already in Djibouti. And now, according to Stephen Townsend, who is the head of the US AFRICOM Command, it wants also to build a base on the Atlantic coast of Africa in Equatorial Guinea. We have also many bilateral issues. For example, relations between Spain and Algeria are now very, very bad after Spain sided with Morocco and its claim over the Western Sahara. Illegal migration is still a problem. Just last weekend, the Spanish had a mini crisis as hundreds of illegal migrants tried to storm the fence between Morocco and Ceuta and Melilla, the Spanish possessions on the African coastline, trying to get into Europe. And the UN has been reporting for months now that Al-Qaeda and ISIS have gained a new foothold in the Sahel with local proxies and franchises, and now we're increasingly trying to go south towards more stable and prosperous states like Senegal and the Ivory Coast. Now, NATO does not lack a history of engagement with Africa and the South. It intervened in Libya in 2011 against Colonel Gaddafi. It has a regional training center dealing with terrorism in Mauritania. And usefully, at least in a kind of gesture to the South, NATO has invited the Mauritanian foreign minister to meet with NATO foreign ministers today in Madrid. NATO has been helping the European Union in terms of its maritime mission in the Mediterranean, dealing with illegal migration. And in 2017, NATO has set up a hub for the South in its Joint Forces Command headquarters in Naples, Italy, in order to have more situational awareness and gather more intelligence on African trends. And NATO, like the EU, has also been reaching out to the African Union and offering help to the African Union in establishing an AU standby force and better planning for its operations. NATO has also lifted UN troops from Burundi into Somalia in the past, but this does not constitute a strategy which is now required. So what can be done? Well, firstly, NATO and the EU certainly can cooperate more in dealing with Africa. EU, I think, is going to be in the lead here because NATO's image in Africa post-Libya is not as good, frankly, as that of the EU. And frankly, NATO is also going to be tied up with the East. So what can NATO do to support the EU in its own missions? For example, logistics, for example, airlift, for example, emergency evacuation, intelligence, and the like. This could be negotiated in the third EU-NATO joint declaration, which we are expecting after the Madrid summit. The second thing is NATO and EU could do a lessons learned exercise. Why have we not succeeded better in the past? Why did Mali decide to ask the French to leave and invite the Russians in? We've had lots of military missions in Africa. Where did they go wrong? Lack of resources, lack of strategy, lack of interaction with local forces, not enough focus on governance. We need to know and draw the lessons before we move ahead. Thirdly, we need to find more reliable partners, not like the military dictators of Mali or elsewhere who quickly turn against the West and go to the highest bidder. As I said earlier, the governments in Senegal and Ivory Coast, Niger, elsewhere have been more long-standing of the West, and we should form a contact group so that we can work closely with them in the future, not just on training, but also on diplomatic initiatives and jointly imposing sanctions on troublemakers like the Russian Wagner mercenaries. The EU could usefully mount a maritime mission off the west coast of Africa in the Gulf of Guinea, where piracy is now becoming an increasing problem as well. The EU could establish also a security forum with the African Union along the lines of the ASEAN Security Forum in Asia, where the US and other countries outside the region are invited to participate and be helpful. Mali has left the multinational military task force, the G5 Sahel, but that means there are still 4 countries in that task force. A lot of effort has gone into building it as an African solution to an African problem, and we should find new members who could participate to keep that useful cooperation initiative going. Finally, we need to hit back or push back against the Chinese and Russian narrative, which often falls on fertile soil in Africa, that it's all the fault of the West, particularly the Ukraine war, the food crisis, the energy crisis, the rise in the cost of living. This anti-Western sentiment has been driven, for example, by, of course, the heritage of colonialism, by a sense that we weren't quick enough in giving Africa vaccines and equal treatment in the wake of COVID-19, a sense that as we've intervened in places like Iraq and Afghanistan in the past with mixed results, who are we to criticize Russia for intervening in Ukraine? Although I would argue that there are big differences there as well. But we clearly need a much better public diplomacy effort in Africa to promote our own view of the world, our own values, and to get all of the African fence sitters more in our camp on our side, which would certainly help of then to create a better environment for future security initiatives. So the South is unfinished business, and NATO will not be a complete security organization until it finds better ways of working with the EU to go beyond the current policy of negligence and incoherence, and to come up with a strategy which is just as well resourced and just as laser focused in the South as what we're seeing today on NATO's eastern flank. Thank you for watching today, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.